Okay, folks, so welcome to this morning's Fife Property Show. Today we're going to talk about furnished lettings. So, could you actually boost your income of your rental property by 21% by furnishing the lettings? Gut reaction, Kerin. Is this really possible?
I mean, it surprised me in a way, so it'll be good to read into it and see all the ins and outs of it.
It's something, we could say the show's right over straight away because I don't do furnished lettings. So we could just finish now. But
And I don't
I don't
particularly
do furnished lettings for a
so
reason.
we'll see.
Yeah, I don't do furnished lettings for a reason, and it'll probably become apparent as we go through this show. But more importantly, the very fact that we're saying it could boost your income, your rental property by 21%. It is something really to be considered, isn't it?
It is. It's something to have a wee look into. So it'll be good to obviously weigh up the pros and cons of it today and see what the outcome is at the end.
Yeah. I mean, to furnish or to not furnish, that hasn't been the question for a long time since I can remember. It's been unfurnished all the way, as I said. Nonetheless, the subject comes up in conversation every now and again. And in a recent Zoopla article, weighed up the pros and cons of furnished versus unfurnished homes, albeit from a tenant's perspective. So we actually thought it's worth exploring from a landlord's point of view, the other side of this, particularly if it opens up a new angle and the extra income for your buy-to-let business. So over the last few years, surveys have found that tenants pay up to 21% more for a furnished house, according to research from onthemarket.com, rising to 50%. Jeez, 50% more. Get my house as furnished now. 50% more for some furnished city rentals. That's the key here, city rentals, according to CIA Insurance. Now, also found that 28% of tenants would pay more for rent in return for a higher quality furniture, while 26% are more likely to rent a furnished property over an empty one. So does that mean a quarter of tenants will pay handsomely for a furnished home? And if so, which quarter is actually going to pay for it? That's the dilemma. I often say this about marketing budgets. 50% of your marketing budget is usually wasted, but it's actually quantifying which 50% is actually the one that's wasted. That's the difficulty. And this is exactly the same here, isn't it, Kerin?
It is, and I think you hit the nail on the head. One of the things that you said is they'll pay it for high quality furnishings. So I think when it comes to if you've got somewhere that has a couch in it, that to be honest, I've gone in and I'm like, I wouldn't sit on that. So I don't know how some people could expect tenants to live with that. So I think we'll touch on that today, just kind of the quality in which you put it in. But when it comes to that, it's also weighing it up, price versus function. So lots of things to consider when we go through today's show, I think.
It's also a landlord's perspective and a tenant's perspective of what is high quality, isn't it?
Yes. I think everybody's opinion differs when it comes to that. There's not really a blanket that covers it all, like what you think could be high quality, somebody else might not, and vice versa. So it's quite a broad spectrum on it to be covering, basically.
But we've also got to consider the thing about isn't supplying furniture just a hassle, an expensive hassle, and that's ultimately what I came down to. Once they took the 10% wear and tear allowance, in terms of your top line rent, so taxation, it made a huge difference to me, and I felt that there was no point in actually providing furnished properties anymore. Plus, the fact is most of my tenants actually want to bring their own property. So I've got a different mix where other people do provide furnished. I'll be interested to hear other people's comments out there about are you a landlord and do you provide furnished properties, and what do you feel is the benefit for you out of this? I mean, there's plenty of questions. So if you do own a rental property in the Fife area or outside of Fife even, because it's all the same really, it's all the same when you come down to it. And if you're wondering whether it's right for a furnished letting, well, this is what we're going to talk about today. This is the first question I've got to ask here. Which homes and tenants suit furnished lettings? What's your opinion on this?
There's quite a different spectrum of it. So as we say, Fife is very pockety. So all the different areas have kind of different demands in them. But student lets and HMOs, so house of multiple occupants, have long been furnished as a standard, basically. It's more expected from them. But the rest of the private rental sector hasn't followed. So we do know from the sales market that stylish homes get higher prices, and obviously people are paying more of a premium to have that convenience as well. So here's what we think the market might look like. So high-earning professional singles, couples and sharers are drawn to design-led homes in popular residential streets and high-quality new developments. So I think obviously as we cover that, people that are maybe professionals that maybe don't want to stay as long, they're only looking for shorter term lets, they're going to be more attracted to furnished properties because it's less hassle for them.
Yeah.
Whereas established families usually accumulate furniture from years of growing a household, so they're probably not the greatest target for a furnished property. I mean, we've seen this before. I've had a property that's had furniture in it, and we have what would be a great tenant, but they're like, I want it unfurnished because they have all their own furniture.
Plus the fact I feel that with people coming along with their own furniture, it doesn't encourage what I would call in some markets a transient population. You know, I always go back to the Wild West days or the Wild East days, which was 30 years ago, when it was a bit different and there was kind of no regulation in the private rented sector, and it was a bit like the Wild West in terms of how everything worked. You want to encourage people to bring their own furniture because it's less likely for them to move. And if you've provided all the furniture, moonlight flits is, I don't know if anybody knows what that expression means. In other words, they disappear in the middle of the night and just load everything into a van and they're away. Hence the reason
where's your tenant and your furniture?
Yeah, hence the reason why it's called a moonlight flight. And also and your kitchen disappears as well at the same time. It's like, wait a minute, I just fitted that kitchen. Who's loading it into the back of the van? That's the sort of thing sometimes it can happen. So you're absolutely right, having established families accumulate furniture from the years of their households is actually quite a good thing to have them bring it to the next property, to your property, because it does encourage them to stay longer, doesn't it?
It does. It puts their own kind of personal stamp on the property as well. It makes it feel more like a home for them as opposed to just like a rental property that they're staying in. So like you say, it does encourage them to stay longer because they have that homely feel to it, and it is all their own possessions, and it can be quite an upheaval to have to move all of that. I mean, the costs incurred in obviously changing from rental, you've got a deposit to pay up front, you'll have your first month's rent to pay up front, potentially a few months rent up front that you'll have to pay. And then you've got all those costs to incur with your moving your furniture as well. So it can be quite a lot to take on. So, for example, people that are saving up to buy a home could be quite happy to avoid the upfront cost of buying furniture that may not fit with their next move either.
Yeah, that makes sense. Andrea actually says here, I mean, friends of hers sold a property, moved into a brand new furnished rental property in Glasgow and loved it. And the furniture that they had then approached the landlord and bought it from him, complete with the furnishings, the whole property and the furnishings itself.
I mean, I've seen that on our sales side as well. People have bought the property, but they've also managed to negotiate it, so they're buying the furniture with it as well, because some properties are well furnished and they do really suit the furniture that's in them, where some people might be coming from a completely different styled property and their furniture might not fit the property that they're going into. So it does give a bit of flexibility with it, which can be quite beneficial.
You're actually right when you think about it. I mean, people are saving up to buy their first home. Generally, that's what happens in some of the private rented properties, that they move into private rented property. They want to avoid all these costs in the beginning because then that just eats into the deposit they're trying to put down for their new home. So, yeah, I get that, why they would want furnished properties. I've never really thought about it like that. As a landlord perspective, though, would I want to encourage that? Because you'd obviously want a tenant that wants to stay a lot longer. So you would want to encourage them to bring their own furniture, and having someone that's just using your property for a shorter period of time means it's less of an occupancy rate, and also more costs incurred when you have to change over tenants. From a landlord's perspective.
The thing that we have now, though, is obviously with the private residential tenancies is there are no fixed terms anymore. So you could have a family that move in and literally within the next month, they could give their 28 days notice and be out. So we're living in a time where there's no fixed periods anymore. We are just having to go by, obviously, when we're going through our reference and initial process for booking viewings, we've got our pre-qualifying stage that we check people's kind of initial compatibility with the property. And one of the questions that we do ask is, how long are you looking to rent for? Because ultimately, ideally, you want somebody that's at least looking initially for a year plus, whereas somebody that's maybe like, oh, 6 months, like it's not really worth the landlord's time. So trying to establish people's initial expectations of how long they're looking to rent for. So for example, you could have a working professional that maybe has a 2-3 year contract, but they'll be maybe going back abroad afterwards. So a nice furnished property could be more attractive for them, rather than when they know they're not going to be here forever, but they are going to be here for the foreseeable for it.
So there's kind of two distinct markets, isn't there, for that, depending on what you're wanting to do. So from a perspective, again, from a landlord's point of view, you're absolutely right. If somebody's only going to stay 6 months, you've got the best part of maybe another £500 to actually then put another tenant in later on, which to a lot of landlords right now with the rent freeze, or you can only put your rent up so much, and then also costs going up and base rates going up and mortgage rates going up as well, and you're getting squeezed in the middle. £500 a lot of money, and effectively it's almost, for some landlords, it could be their whole profit, if not half their profit for that year. And let's be honest, you have to have a return on capital, because everybody goes, you do get people out there going, oh, you shouldn't be making a profit out of property. It's like, well, why would you be doing it then if that's the case? Yeah. What would be the point? It's it's the same example of, why do I put my money into a bank account to get a high interest rate? Well, to make a profit on my money, because that's what it is. So it's the same similar vein, but one person chooses to put a roof over their head, whereas another person just chooses the path of least resistance and puts their money into a bank and hopes that they'll get a decent enough return in order to make sure their capital actually grows, rather than actually depletes with the degradation of inflation against your money. How it just eats away at. I mean, inflation's probably about 8.7 just now, or thereabouts. And interest rates, I actually noticed, I'm sure I was reading the BBC News yesterday. I know I shouldn't be reading the BBC News. It's not exactly the greatest source of information, but it did say that the watchdog is actually looking into banks right now, because they don't seem to be passing on these base rate increases as savings rates, to savers themselves. So people out there want to make a bit more money, but are in it for the medium to long term. Probably property is a good consideration for that investment.
And that's the thing as well. What you said, you need to be ideally making a profit on it, not only for the fact that you're investing your time and your money into it, but this is an ongoing thing that you're going to have. Like, you're going to have ongoing maintenance. You're going to have tenants that are maybe coming out and obviously having to pay maybe new fees to remarket the property and secure yourself a new tenant for it and further down the line. So if you're not making money on it, how are you expected to cover the costs that are involved? So making sure that you're maximizing your investment for it, whether that is furnishing it to get yourself a higher rent, or even just freshening up the paint in it, maybe when a tenant comes out, to give it that nice clean look to it, as opposed to a tenant that's coming in and seeing tired walls and a property that's maybe not the best looked after. It means you're not going to attract the best quality tenants for it. So all the little things that do go into make it so you're attracting the better quality tenants.
So let's just jump back to which homes the tenants suit furnished lettings, which homes in that suit. Have you got any final thoughts on that, or are there anything to pick up on that?
I think it really depends on which area your property is in. So I think we'll cover it a wee bit on, but obviously the different areas that we have in Fife, like I say, it's very pockety. So if you're kind of in the Leaven, Glenrothes, Kirkcaldy, even maybe areas, it tends to attract quite a lot of families in these areas. So like we say, most of them have their own furniture anyway that they've accumulated, whereas the closer we get to St Andrews, there's more of a demand for furnished property, because you've got people that are perhaps PhD students or that are working at the university that are maybe only going to be here for a couple of years. So there is more of an attraction for furnished properties. For example, we have some in Guardbridge right now. So we've got some lovely 3-bedroom semi-detached houses. I have a 3-bedroom apartment that I just put on, and the amount of interest that I've had in it, because it's got the furniture in it, because of the area that it's in, it's very much pulling in the attraction for the people that are going to St Andrews. So obviously some of them not so suitable just with the income side of it, but the ones that are, obviously it'll make a great home for somebody because it does have everything that they need. So all they really need is their possessions to be able to do the move. And likewise, people that have maybe been in student, like university accommodation, that are now making their times up with it and they need somewhere else. They've been used to having that furniture. So it's obviously, it would be a lot for them to then have to go and purchase everything from scratch when they've come from somewhere that has the furnishings already in it.
Yeah, so it's fair to say, well, not every tenant or home suits a furnished letting. Plenty actually do. So I suppose it's just check with the local letting agents about the requests they receive from tenants to see if there's demand actually worth meeting for furnished properties.
Exactly. That's the thing. Check with your agent, check what area your property's in, what the links are close by to it as well. Obviously, what it's within close vicinity to, for example, like universities or train stations, will kind of depict on what the demand's going to be like for furnished or unfurnished.
So coming on to then about the legislative aspect of this, I mean, what laws are actually surrounding furnished lettings?
So obviously, as a landlord, there are a lot of legal implications that have to be adhered to, which is why it's beneficial to have a letting agent to keep you up to date with them all. But although there are no legal definition of what constitutes as a furnished let compared to unfurnished, tenants will expect at least a sofa, dining table and chairs if there's space for them, and a bed and wardrobe in each room. So bare minimum, they're kind of looking for like the main items of furniture for it. So your kind of bigger, bulkier things that are the more expensive things to purchase. In my time, I've seen such a wide range of furnishings, from one just having the basics, such as the main items of furniture, to other ones having right down to like cutlery, crockery, everything. So it very much depends. There's not kind of like a right or a wrong for it. It just depends for what a landlord is quite happy to supply with a furnished let. So, however, there are regulations about furniture that you provide and what you can claim back on your tax return. So these include any upholstery furniture you supply must comply with British fire regulations and have labels attached that prove that they meet the standard. So if you do have furniture that has these little triangular labels on them, don't cut them off.
I get this a lot. When I remember I used to go around to see a lot of landlords, and they said, yeah, my sofa's actually quite new. And I says, but have you actually still got the tickets on it? No, we took them off because they were just big long tickets. And I went, well, you can't rent it. You can't rent it with that now. You'll have to take them out. But I've just bought it. It's like, but you can't. You've cut the tickets off. It's a legal requirement that tickets remain on the actual furnishings itself. And it's the same. It happens with headboards. You know, you've got the headboard and you've got the wee ticket on the back. It sways about. Well, most people, it's on with the staple. That's how detailed I am. And it's like the amazing amount of people actually just take that off. And yeah, it should be still on there. So if it's not on there, you can't legally use that headboard for furnishings as well. What other things do we need to consider then?
So upholstery category covers any items with fabric. So this includes sofas, armchairs, dining chairs, beds, blinds, and curtains. So anything that has a fabric finish to it, this will include. However, the rules only apply to furnishings made after 1970. So if you're a lover of Danish leather couches from the 60s and mid-century modern interiors, go for it. You'll be fine.
Now, this is because they were made with different material at that time, whereas the newer material that came out from the 70s onwards wasn't compliant, and they were prone to actually encouraging the fire to spread. It's a classic example about, you know, I think most people have seen it, where the fire brigade put a sofa in the corner in this makeshift room, and then they put a cigarette on it, and within a couple of minutes, the whole thing's ablaze.
And so we get to that at school.
So it's important we actually do that and make sure that it's compliant as well. So is there anything else we need to consider? I'm sure there is, probably more than likely.
Yeah, so obviously there is the tax return side of the furnishings being in there as well. So you can't claim back the initial costs of buying the furniture against your tax return, but repairs and replacements are both allowable expenses. So I think one of the things that we should ideally highlight, whatever you provide with a furnished let, you are responsible for. So for example, I say to a landlord, worst case scenario, say you have a couch and it snaps. You then have to replace that couch unless the tenant has damaged it and it is just broken as a sign of wear and tear over time. I mean, realistically, if you have a couch that's been in there since before 1970, it's probably due for renewal anyway.
This is where a lot of prone, what we call accidental landlords, use the opportunity to leave some of their existing furniture in the property without actually getting rid of it. But you're exactly right. You do mention this to everybody, and everybody should be aware of this, that if you actually leave anything there at all, even though you're saying that you don't want it, it's your responsibility because you've left it as the landlord. Now, is there a way to get around that?
There is. We have a loophole. So if you are a landlord that has a furnished item that you want to leave in your property, but you do not want to be responsible for it, it can be gifted to the tenants. Now, what this means, though, is the ownership is basically transferred to the tenant. So although you no longer have the responsibility for it, if it does break down or need replaced, it does mean that the tenant is now basically the owner of the item. So if they choose to move on from their property, they can take it with them. So it's knowing, obviously, it can be quite beneficial if there's something that maybe, I mean, it can even apply. We have quite a lot of it with, like, there's been an old fridge freezer or a washing machine that's been left by perhaps a previous tenant. It's still in working order, but the landlord doesn't want to be responsible for it. So it gets gifted to the next tenant. So they can get the use out of it. I mean, 9 times out of 10, these things do tend to last and the next tenant can get the use out of them. But when it does come around to the point where they stop working or do need replaced, the landlord then does not have the responsibility for it. So my general advice for a landlord is less is better, because then you have less responsibility and things that are going to need maintained during the tenancy.
Perfect. So if you are providing furnishings, what should we be doing with that? Because clearly, I mean, you just provide furnishings and say, well, I'll get them when you finish your tenancy. But should we be doing something to safeguard the landlord and ourselves to make sure we are actually going to get the stuff returned? Classic example is, I've seen it before, where somebody's given possibly a really top quality cooker to a tenant, and then when the tenancy's ended, they've then said, wait a minute, that's not my cooker that I gave you. It's an inferior cooker. But it's still a cooker. And then it's like, well, what cooker did you give me? And how can you prove it? Should we be doing something about that?
Yes, and just before I go on to it, that's actually a good point that's made me think, when you are having to replace items, you have to replace them like for like. So if you have a high quality appliance or furnishing and something happens that it needs replaced, you have to then replace it with that same quality. You can't maybe have like a £1,000 whatever and then replace it with like a £200 replacement. It has to be something that matches like for like. So the key to doing a furnished let, to be honest, the key to doing any let is having an inventory in place. So this should be a fully comprehensive report that should include everything that is listed in the property. So not only should this include furnishings, but it should also include things such as the cleanliness of the property, right down to the paint, the light switches. Everything should be included in this. Now, I've had conversations with landlords before that have an inventory. However, it's just been a bit of paper with maybe like a list of things that are in the property. However, the legislation around deposits and the work that is now required to make a claim against a deposit if required is far more comprehensive than it used to be. I love the word I'll use for it. But basically, the landlord has to prove that it wasn't like that at the start of the tenancy, or it was like that. So without an inventory, basically now landlords do not have a claim against the deposit. So this should be a fully comprehensive report, including both descriptions, pictures. It has to be date stamped as well. So ideally, this should be carried out maximum a couple of days before the tenant's moving into the property, so it's as accurate as possible for the move-in.
What's your thoughts on the landlord doing it themselves?
Don't do it. Just pay someone to get it done.
I saw your expression in your face there. And so, why is that though? Why is that?
So ourselves, anyway, we have a out-of-house contractor that carries out our inventories, and he is so comprehensive with it. So even for example, a 2-bedroom unfurnished property, this report is at least 50 pages long. So this has so many pictures, so many descriptions. It's as comprehensive as it can be. It also takes into account the meter readings from the start of the tenancy as well. So there are no discrepancies at the end. So when our property management team go in and do a sign-out report at the end of the tenancy, we then have this inventory to compare it against. If there is anything that exceeds wear and tear, we then have as detailed of documents that we can to make a claim against the tenant's deposit. Yeah. So if they've left if they've either taken furniture that they shouldn't, or maybe the property needs a clean done to, or anything that could be involved in it, then you will need an inventory to be able to justify your claim, because basically it's in favour of the tenant, because obviously for a long time it was really hard for tenants to get their deposit back, and unjustifiably. So this basically rules out all the kind of rogue landlords making rogue claims against it. So it should kind of level it out. So basically with the inventory and a sign out report, you're then able to provide evidence to show that it wasn't like that, or in some cases it was like that at the start of the tenancy, and you can return your property to how it should be, as opposed to perhaps how some people have left it, unfortunately.
And do you think a landlord nowadays can just get away with taking a video and just walking around the property with a video and using that? And do you think there's a distinction between the landlord doing it and an independent contractor doing it?
Yeah, so obviously an independent contractor, they're going to identify anything, they're unbiased basically. They're going in to carry out their job. If there's scuffs on the wall, perhaps the landlord would be like, oh, I'll just skim past that. Whereas they are there, and it has to be a true reflection of the property. So if there is anything, maybe some scuffs on the wall from a last tenant that maybe haven't been bad enough to warrant a full fresh coat of paint on it, it's good to have the inventory to show for a tenant's point of view as well that maybe there are the odd imperfection in it, so they are not getting penalised at the end of their tenancy for things that weren't caused by them. So it is to have it balanced out. It's not in favour of a landlord or a tenant, an inventory. It is basically to safeguard a landlord. So if there is any damage, to be honest, it safeguards a tenant as well. So if there is any disputes at the end of the tenancy, it's a true reflection of what's occurred during that time.
So is it important then as well, when you're providing an inventory and you're obviously providing possibly goods and furnishings, is it important as well to include things like care manuals and stuff, especially if you've got, for example, a leather sofa, especially if you've got possibly a cooker or a range cooker, it maybe requires a wee bit more detailed thinking about how to work it. Is it important actually to include all these things?
It is. That's the thing. If you have like specialist either furniture or appliances, the more manuals the better, basically, because there are things, obviously we can go in and be like, this is how you work your boiler, this is all the general ins and outs of the property. But if you have something specific, like to be honest, I have no idea how a range cooker works.
Yeah.
So having like a manual for things like that, that's not the most commonly used things, then it benefits. So if you do have any manuals that come with your appliances, any furnitures that you're supplying with the property, it can be very beneficial. I do like it when I go into a property to do a moving and there's a pack that has all the manuals in it. Yeah.
I mean, in our experience, and I could probably say that for yourself as well, in your experience as well, better quality homes get looked after by their tenants. And there's no reason to think otherwise for a furnished rental property, aimed at the upper end of the property market. And I do think that if you provide a good quality accommodation in the beginning, is it fair to say there's an expectation from on the tenant's behalf, from the landlord to the tenant, unwritten. It's just assumed, because I've provided you with really good quality accommodation, that I expect that to be kept like this.
I would say so, yes. So ultimately, if you've got somebody that is going to want to look after a property going forward, they want a property that's been looked after in the first place. So they want to be going into somewhere nice that they can just move into, as opposed to somewhere that they're perhaps going to have to do work to. I mean, we get people that have have tenants that have been in before that have maybe got like a feature wall or some sort of personal touch that they've put on it, which has been previously agreed with the landlord, which is fine. So it does give a tenant a little bit of scope to put their own stamp on it. But the general consensus is that if you're providing a nice property that's been looked after, a tenant should want to look after that going forward as well.
Yeah. So this takes me on to things like, what about living room and dining rooms and furnished lettings? What should we be considering with this then?
So living room and dining rooms are usually used by everyone in the home. So along with like when you've got friends visiting, they need furnishings to be stylish and durable while allowing your tenants to accessorise with their own taste. So things that are quite neutral. So instead of the typical landlord sofas, old, heavy, dark brown and bulky, let's face it, most people don't want them anymore.
Yep.
Choose a nice warm fabric and neutral shades with nice, easy to clean, as well as that tenants can put their own accessories on. So whenever it comes to lets, I usually advise the neutrals the better. It means that people can put their own stamp on it, whether it's putting a nice colourful pillow on it or a throw. It just lets people put their own kind of comfort to it and adds that homely touch for them rather than them feeling like they're living in someone else's property.
So what we're saying is really provide the essentials, but don't accessorize. Leave that to the tenant to do.
Exactly. That's the thing. Give them the chance to put their own stamp on it. It's good to have all the main furnishings. But I think one of the things we touched on there is have durable ones as well. Ultimately, this is a rental property. If you want it to withstand multiple tenancies, you will have to go for something that is quite perhaps a durable fabric.
Yeah.
So in some cases, velvet, not the best idea for a rental property.
What sort of design should we be going for then?
Something that is, go for either like square or rectangular or circular dining table with corner legs and neutral wood or glass top. Also kind of like a marble finish is quite in just now. So something that is still quite neutral, again, like we say, but so I would avoid going for things that are too bulky though. You don't want things to be having to get yourself around and basically having the room like an obstacle course. So whenever you are furnishing a property, go for something that is going to suit your property. So there's the Any Day series from John Lewis, which is nice, easy, clean. And obviously, like I say, also going for items such as
IKEA does quite good stuff as well, for that high end market.
As I said in my IKEA furnished room. But the good thing with IKEA is obviously you're building it yourself, so obviously you are getting it a little bit, some things anyway, a little bit cheaper, but they have a lot of neutral things. So as I said, my white walls and my white desk with my white day bed. But you can see, obviously, even myself, like you've got nice like pink pillows. Like it's really good because it is so neutral. So it does give people the chance to put their own stamp on it.
Yeah.
So also I'd avoid going for, when it comes to furnishing, as I say, going for things that are appropriate to the size of the space that's available. So avoiding mini versions that are cramped to sit on, and stay clear of oversized pieces, as I say, that turn the room into obstacle courses.
And then line of sight to the bay windows and stuff like that become obscured. Therefore, the room doesn't fit very well, does it?
And that's the thing, it's making something that's a comfortable living space. You don't want to walk into a room and it seems so much smaller than it actually is. Whereas when you take that furniture out, you're like, oh, there's actually quite a lot of space in here. But people have perhaps put furniture in that just doesn't suit it, and it takes away from the living space of the room.
I'm amazed at how many properties are actually gone into quite recently, actually, where you've just got almost a 2-seater sofa couch, and then there's a couple of chairs that you can put in a cupboard and take away, and for some reason it fits, it just works, and yet the traditional is you've got to have a 3-seater sofa, and then you've got to have 2 seats that actually are exactly the same as the sofa, and that seems to have disappeared now in terms of the rental market.
Yeah, I mean, even like you say, that the typical used to be kind of like your 2-seater, your 3-seater couch, and maybe like the armchair that went with it. That was what I grew up with anyway. But now, like, I'm very much like the corner couch, because it's a good use of, like, if you've got like a room that does fit it, it's a good use of obviously the space and obviously the comfort for it as well. So it can get a little bit more expensive when it comes to rent. Also, maybe like the 2 or 3-seater is the more sensible option depending on cost. But definitely, I think corner sofas have become quite a staple in living rooms now.
So really, when it comes to the sort of home that high-earning tenants would pay extra for, one with shared spaces where people love to hang out alone with housemates or with friends, sounds pretty good to us, I suppose. Yeah.
Exactly.
It takes me nicely on the one about, just as you've probably spoken about your IKEA designed house.
It's not all IKEA, we'll add that. This room pretty much is, but it's not the rest.
What then? We've covered things like living room and dining rooms. We've covered the legislation. We've covered the introduction about where to get things. The next one for me is probably bedrooms, furnished lettings. I mean, I presume probably just what type of bed? Do you provide wardrobes? What do you do? What do you do? How do you do this?
Yeah, so everyone loves and needs a good night's sleep. So investing in the correct furnishings that leave your tenant feeling well rested every morning in a room that can store their belongings with ease. So nobody wants to be waking up after a bad night's sleep. It just sets you up for a bad day. So obviously this is such an important room because it's where you spend about half your life basically, whether that sleeping and getting ready in the morning. So furnishing in the bedroom is very important to be getting right. So pairing a high quality mattress and a mattress protector, as you'll be forever replacing cheap ones, with a sturdy bed on legs that your tenants can add drawers to, that they can store their belongings underneath. So when it comes to a bedroom, storage is key.
Quite important in terms of the new design houses, because a lot of new houses don't have the huge amount of storage that the older houses have.
Yes, and even like wardrobe space as well. I mean, a lot of new houses don't have built-in wardrobes. When they're going for obviously your new build developments, it's the wardrobes are extra if you want them fitted. So, or either that or you have to buy them yourself just out with the company.
Oh, you're literally getting a glorified cupboard.
Yeah, it's basically when you're buying a new build, it's effectively like you're getting a shell and you have to put your own stamp on it from there on. So storage is such an important thing, whether that is under the bed, but you can also, I mean, realistically, you can't beat floor to ceiling built-in wardrobes. So they give you optimal capacity, particularly with sliding mirrored doors that save floor space and add extra depth. So obviously it's quite beneficial. Even the mirrors kind of give you, when you've got mirrors in a property, it does tend to give you like a bit more of a sense of space for it. It just keeps the room a bit more open as well. And like I say, it maximizes that storage. So whether that's under the bed, in the wardrobe, I know myself, storage, very important. Very much have to maximize the room so you're getting the best of the storage use out of it. So freestanding wardrobes should be 60 centimeters deep to be able to hang clothes and properly on full-size hangers. So I remember when I was looking to buy somewhere, I went in and it was the style of house that had like a sloped roof on it, and the wardrobe was kind of like built into that. And I was like, you can even put a coat hanger on that. I was like, what was the point?
Because of the coom ceilings.
Yeah, exactly. So like I've seen properties that have had coom ceilings that still have proper wardrobes, but this I was like, you can even put a coat hanger in there.
The one thing I would say about freestanding wardrobes is to be nervous about is make sure that when you open the doors on the wardrobe doesn't have any indication of being able to tip over. If you have that indication, you need to fix the wardrobe to the back of the wall with brackets.
Usually they come with brackets as well, so you can do that. Obviously, you do not want it tipping over on a tenant, basically. So if you are putting your own freestanding wardrobes in a property, make sure they are securely built. The back of mine has popped off already, and that's because I built it myself. So, and as Jim says, make sure they're secured to the wall because you don't need that. So when it comes to wardrobes as well, I would go for a quality one. So you've got one that, because I mean the amount of times that we've seen ones that are built in that end up having issues with the doors sliding on the runners and they either need repaired or replaced. So going for good quality ones in the first place can save you that ongoing cost with them if you do have one with sliding doors on it, because that's
there's also a nervousness if you have mirrored doors, you know, the possibility that they could actually crack or break. And you know, could you have a safety issue with that? Is it advisable maybe to not get mirrored doors?
I think obviously when it comes to mirrored one, it can be beneficial to have, but there is obviously going to be that safety side of it. So I mean, ultimately, hopefully it would be fine during the tenancy, and if you have purchased it fairly new, it ideally should come with a bit of a warranty as well. However, we've seen it before, tenants have maybe something slipped and it's cracked it, and basically that's it, it needs replaced because it is damaged. And obviously it's the safety hazard if they are broken. So it can be sometimes beneficial if you're maybe putting a freestanding one in, just to have one that with cupboard doors that open up and that are solid wood, as opposed to the mirrored sliding doors that do have the potential to crack. You've got to weigh up your options there as to what you think is the best option for your rental property. Yeah,
I mean, we've all seen it and maybe even had it, an unpleasant and hopelessly impractical bedroom, I suppose. Nobody will pay extra for one of those. So focus on comfort for a premium experience and rent itself. Right, this brings me to possibly the last thing we're going to talk about, which is probably one of the most important things. Curtains and blinds. Should I be doing that for furnished lettings?
So I think there is a bit of an expectation when it comes to it can be quite a costly thing to do. As someone that had to put new blinds in every single room in their house, it costs a lot. So for tenants that are maybe not wanting to, that are not going to be there for the long term, that are maybe, like we say, only looking to be there for maybe a couple of years or so, when they're having to buy blinds that are fitted to the window that they're realistically not going to be able to take with them, it can be a bit off-putting, regardless of if it's furnished or unfurnished. So you might sometimes get away with not supplying curtains or blinds in an unfurnished let, but you'll definitely need to include them in a furnished one. So here are some of the best practical guidelines. Good quality Venetian blinds in white or neutral timber look great in a living room, dining room, and also in studies in modern and traditional homes. They'll also match any tenant's taste because, like we say, neutral is better.
We also, the one thing that I also find as well is sometimes when it comes to blinds and curtains, I mean, while we try to provide, the basic essentials, and the blinds and curtains are there as well, sometimes the tenants have a preference for something that they want, and they do realise they're going to stay there a bit longer. And do you often get approached for people just to say that, would the landlord be able to contribute part of this cost to the blinds? Because I'll be leaving them anyway.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Most of the time they do get left behind because they're something that are very specific to a window. I mean, sometimes they have to be specially made as well. Some windows aren't standard sizes, so it can be beneficial for a landlord, if they're in good enough condition, to have blinds in place. What I do advise, regardless of if it's furnished or unfurnished, is to at least have a curtain rail put up, so tenants at least can just come in and put their curtains on it. It also saves tenants drilling holes in the walls or above the walls trying to do it themselves. So whenever it does come to it, I do advise landlords at least put a curtain pole up, so they've got the option to put curtains up in the meantime. If they want to get a blind going forward for an unfurnished one, for example, then they've got the option to do so. But curtain poles, I feel, are at least an essential, especially if you have like a peculiarly shaped window. We've had that before, so it's up to, I've said to the landlord, look, at least put something in place that will accommodate a tenant to be able to use it, because the way it was, I'm like, I have no idea how you put a blind in that.
Yeah,
and it would probably be quite costly as well.
So when you were talking about Venetian blinds and that, is it they're not exactly easy to clean?
No, they're not. So when it comes to it, it's trying to get one that, it can be quite good. Obviously, the wooden ones will probably be a bit harder just with the quality that they are. So even the plastic coated ones can be a bit easier because you can run a cloth over them a lot easier than you could for the wooden ones. It won't have, I mean, we've seen ones before that maybe had like watermarks left on them, even from them sitting on the windowsill. Maybe somebody's had a cup there and it's soaked onto the blinds a little bit. So it's beneficial to have like kind of plastic coated Venetian blinds if you are going to put them in. So they've got that easier, that they're a bit more durable and easier to clean, because they can get absolutely minging somehow.
I know. Tell me about it. It's like, especially if some tenants have got pets, especially if you've got vertical blinds, because vertical blinds are a harbour for this, and they're fabric, and cats go in and out of them, dogs rub themselves up against them. So eventually, at some point, they do actually get dirty, and possibly they might get damaged. So, so there's an issue there as well in terms of coming back to the inventory you talked about, and the fact of the importance to make sure that this is all categorised and itemised, the fact that the blinds are in good working order and there's no damage to them at all, because simple things like wee cracks in the connectors that connect all the blinds together at the bottom is usually the first thing to take the toll, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's the ones like the vertical blinds that you say that have got all the kind of little bead bits at the bottom. They are very commonly end up getting broken. Just the plastic over time, it snaps, that holds the beads onto the actual curtain itself. They end up breaking. They're not very easy to deal with replacements for them as well, and they end up becoming a thing that has seen better days, and we usually advise a landlord to get rid of before the next tenant comes along at that point.
Which is another additional cost when you think about it. It's more or less just a write-off. So what would your advice then be about, if you were to pin your colours to the mast about the best type of blind, then for a living room, then what would that blind be? Or what would that curtain be? Would you just say go for a curtain?
I would go for, if it's unfurnished, I would just advise putting a curtain pole up. It gives the tenant the option to put their own curtains up, which they'll then be taken, they should be taken away at the end of the tenancy. If it's harboured any smells over the time, that's something they should then be taken with them, or if they don't, it's easily disposed of. If you are wanting to put a blind up, personally, I find the wood effect, but the plastic coated white Venetian blinds are the best option for it. The vertical ones, they're a nightmare for breaking. We've seen it far.
What I always found good about the curtain was you could take the curtain off and actually just put it in the washing machine. So when you put it back up, it smelled of lavender. And immediately gave the whole place a refresh, just with the curtain being washed.
Exactly. So curtain poles are probably the best option. When it comes to a furnished let, I would probably put some curtains in, because like we say, there's going to be more of an expectation for them to be there in a furnished let. Likewise, obviously, when it comes to a bedroom, blackout blinds are an excellent option for bedrooms, as they give the tenant the option for total darkness and allowing some light depending on how they like to sleep. So it comes back to a good night's sleep is key. So we would usually advise against having window treatments in wet or humid areas such as the kitchen or bathrooms. So if privacy is an issue, consider replacing any clear glass with obscured glass. So I mean, prime example of this is blinds in the bathroom. They're just a harbour for moisture, mold, just obviously with the condensation that occurs in a bathroom.
I get it. I understand that.
Even in a kitchen as well. I mean, I've tried to clean my kitchen blind and I think I just made it look worse. So so it can be beneficial not to have them in the kitchen if that's an option. And like we say, if it is a case of privacy, there are options. Even if you don't want to change the pane of glass to an obscured one, you get quite a lot of maybe more suitable for a kitchen than a bathroom, but the kind of sticker that goes over it instead. We've seen quite a few tenants that are maybe in properties that do struggle with privacy that have perhaps put them on like the lower pane of the glass as well, just so they're still getting the natural light coming in, but it does give them that bit more privacy as well.
I've seen people use plantation shutters as well, actually built into the window. And it's the landlord that's provided them and just put them in, and they're there forever. And they seem to be the most robust, but potentially could probably be the most expensive.
Yeah, I think obviously we've got a couple of rentals that have got them that are quite like high quality properties in general that have obviously had them fitted along with the build for them, and they're still like new because, like you say, they're quite robust, but they'll probably be like that because they came with the price tag to make them that quality in the first place.
So then does it come back to a false economy of buying cheap?
That's the thing. The cheaper you buy, the more you're going to have to replace. So at the end of the day, if you're buying something, I would say not necessarily having to go top of the range, but at least like a good level of it, that you're getting a quality product for your money. It saves the continual turnover of having to replace them when you could have just bought something maybe better quality in the first place and it would have stayed for the duration.
And then when you think about it, it's not just the cost of replacement, it's the cost of actually the labour involved in replacing it, which could be more than the actual cost of the actual item itself. So
that's the thing. If you're not handy, you're having to get a tradesman in to do so, and like you say, that
could end up being that false economy, couldn't it? So what other things do we need to think about? I mean, you've got humid areas for the bathrooms and stuff like that, and you talked about the kitchens. We talked about the bedroom areas. We talked about just in the Venetian blinds and the curtains. One of the things that I'd actually thought about, in the early days, where I had the smaller windows, where it was just a singular window with a top popper, rather than actually get two massive curtains and have one either side, I actually just used to put one big curtain right along and actually put it back on a tie back. So I was able to use one set of curtains for two windows. Now that's just me being tight, but it worked. It worked. It was half the cost for two windows.
It can be quite good even for like draft proofing. See, if you've got like an older door in your property that's maybe...
That's a good point as well, yeah.
So you can get like a nice big durable curtain. If you've got like a porch, that tends to be the most kind of common area for them, because perhaps you've got your kind of not as energy efficient door that'll lead you into the porch, and then maybe like a more suitable one into the actual property itself. But to prevent any further drafts coming in, if you get a nice thick durable curtain, you can put that over the door to obviously keep some of the heat in for the property.
Should we, with curtains and blinds and stuff like that, should we consider health and safety depending on who the tenant is?
Yes. So I think regardless whether it's furnished, unfurnished, if you've got blinds or curtains in place, there is health and safety is a landlord's responsibility. So including the hooks or the clear like curtain wraps that come with the cord, and install them obviously on the side of the window so they're out of reach of young children who could be easily tangled up. And even same with pets as well, pets that come along and knock them, you don't want your pet getting tangled up. So if the curtains and blinds do tend to come with either a tie back for the curtains, or if it comes to blinds, you've got the little kind of plastic bit that you can loop the cable around so it's not getting tangled up.
Wow. And I just thought furnished lettings was just a straightforward process. And we've managed to talk about this, so much about this and so much it's involved. Thank you very much for coming on, Kerin, and discussing the subject, because I kind of thought it was quite important. And as the research suggests, that furnished properties in certain areas, in city areas, for example, can actually attract a higher rent by up to possibly by up to about 21%, which is actually quite a startling figure considering, because if your rent say £1,000, and then that's another £201 a month. So another £201 a month times the 12 months is another 2,400. And that's not necessarily anything extra. That potentially, depending on how you've done it in the first place, could end up going straight to the bottom line, because the furnishings could last quite a long time. Furnishings themselves, just a general point of view, how does the Safe Deposit Scotland or the deposit systems, how do they view furnishings, the lifespan of them? You know, do they have arbitrary numbers that they say, like a carpet should be so long, a cooker should be so long, and all the rest of it? How do they look at that?
I think it just depends on the individual adjudicator that deals with the case, to be perfectly honest. So obviously they've got to allow for fair wear and tear regardless, furnished, unfurnished. There has to be wear and tear accommodated for during a tenancy. So obviously, depending on how long a tenant's been in the property, depends on how much wear and tear would be acceptable for it. Obviously, furniture is going to be the same as well. So if you've had maybe like the odd nick to maybe a dining room table or like a ring on it, I mean, there's various different aspects that you are going to have to take into consideration when it comes to wear and tear for furniture, because ultimately, if you've got a great tenant that looks after it so well, then ideal. But I mean, realistically, life happens, mistakes happen, whether it's you've put your hot mug down on a coffee table and it's left a mark on it, or there's been the odd little spill on the couch. Like, these are all things that are going to have to be obviously taken into consideration, that you might not get your furniture back in the pristine condition that it was given in the first place. So it's taking that into account. So I think as well for accidental landlords, maybe moving in with a partner and leaving their personal furniture there, for example, their couch, their bed frame, all these kind of things, it's having to take that perhaps sentimental attachment away from it, because you are leaving it as part of your investment. It's no longer your couch, it is your tenant's couch basically. So it can be something to consider whether you want to do furnished or unfurnished.
I've seen that before, and I've experienced it before, where, you know, some landlords have actually gone, well, this is the couch that we've got, and it has sentimental attachment to us because it was this and it was that. The tenant needs to look after it, and they can't do anything with it. It needs to stay there. And I'm like, you're literally declining your market as we go, and the number of people that could actually rent this property, because you've got a sentimental attachment to a couch. Put it into storage.
Yeah, or take it with you.
or take it with you, or do something with it. But don't leave the tenant with your expectations about how you expect them to live their life in what is effectively their home, because ultimately we're giving them a house and they're making it a home.
Exactly, and that's the thing. People don't all live the same ways. What's acceptable to some people maybe isn't. Some people may have different standards for that. So we can, as an agent, we can't impose on the way that people live, as long as they are paying their rent, looking after the property, not causing any damage to it. If they've got washing on the floor, then they have washing on the floor. You can't impact on the way that somebody lives in their own property. So yeah, if you do have sentimental attachment to furnishings that you're leaving, I would advise not leaving them. It's not to say that anything's going to happen to them, but you have the potential to set yourself up for upset or basically upheaval at the end of the tenancy.
A bit of aggravation between tenant and landlord, and unfortunately we're often caught in the middle. And it's difficult to mediate between both parties, especially if there's an expectation from one and it doesn't match the expectation of another. That's where the challenge arises, and it's a skillful letting agent who could actually mediate that appropriately in order to have the outcome for both parties as a win-win situation, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, perfect. So what is the next steps that anybody can do then if they're considering this?
So if you are considering this and you're not sure whether it's best for yourself to go furnished or unfurnished, get in contact with your local agent. So if you do have any questions, whether your property is in an area that would be demand for furnishings, please feel free to contact us. You can give us a call on our lettings line on 01333 424 188, or you can message either myself, or you can send us a message directly on their chat here, and we'll get back to you if you'd like.
Direct on this chat, or you can send an email via lettings@fifeproperties.co.uk. Simple as that.
So if you've got any queries, nice and easy to get in contact with us.
Perfect. Thanks very much for coming on, Kerin. Really appreciate that. That's a good in-depth into Furnished Lettings. I'll probably even
I know.
consider that myself. Okay, that's us. Any other questions for anybody else, please feel free to message them later on. If you're on the podcast, please feel free to get in touch with us as well. We're more than happy to help you. Until next time, guys, that's us for this weekend. We'll see you next weekend for our sales show. Bye-bye for now.
Goodbye.